Last week, I did a video about what happened to the top 10 quarterbacks in Clemson football history, and I felt like today would be a great day to do the same thing for Alabama. Mac Jones, Tua Tagovailoa, and A.J. McCarron are probably the names that come to mind immediately when you think about Alabama quarterbacks, but who are the other stars that came through Tuscaloosa? Today, we're obviously going to talk about the top 10 quarterbacks in Alabama football history and what happened to each one. But first, before we get started, be sure to give the video a like if you want to support what I'm doing here on YouTube, subscribe if you love college football content, suggest what topic I should do next, and turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload. This time, I'm making the list based on the top 10 quarterbacks in terms of career touchdowns. And unless you come up with some complicated algorithm, I think total touchdowns is the best way to go in terms of stats to see which quarterbacks were the best. This list is not by most talented, but feel free to come up with your own list in the comment section and let me know who you think the best quarterback in Alabama football history is. Now let's go ahead and get started. At number 10, we have a name that all NFL fans know in Freddie Kitchens. Before he was a disaster hire for the Cleveland Browns, he grew up in Alabama and eventually took his talents to the Tide. In his 3 seasons as a starter, Alabama went 22-13 and won the Gator Bowl, the Citrus Bowl, and the Outback Bowl. At the time of his departure, he ranked 3rd in school history in career passing attempts, 4th in passing yards, and 5th in career completions. Instead of the NFL, he went straight into coaching, where he started in college with schools such as North Texas, LSU, and Mississippi State, but he later made the jump to the NFL with the Cowboys and then spent 11 years with the Cardinals before he became the running backs coach for the Browns and eventually was the head coach after Hugh Jackson was fired, and it became a disaster and he was totally in over his head. After that, he became a part of the Giants staff last year, and I would say he has a pretty interesting story, and a lot of people probably don't even know he went to Alabama. Coming in at number 9, we have Blake Sims. Born and raised in Gainesville, Georgia, he became a star football player from a young age, and that is actually the same high school that Deshaun Watson would later come from. As a senior, he threw for 2,288 yards with 28 scores, and also rushed for 863 yards and 13 touchdowns while becoming an all-state caliber player. He blossomed into a pretty big-time recruit and would have the chance to go to many different schools to play football or even run track if worse came to worse. He was rated a 4-star recruit and chose Alabama over Tennessee, Georgia, Florida State, and Michigan. He arrived in Tuscaloosa with little chance to play as A.J. McCarron had just taken over, and he did play a couple of positions and was a backup for a while until he would finally get his time to shine. He was pegged to be the starter going into 2014, but then Saban recruited Florida State transfer Jake Coker to the program, and this started a quarterback battle. Sims hired a trainer, got to work, and eventually won the job. He played great as a starter and even set the then record for passing yards in a season, but sadly, people looked down on this year because he lost on the road to Ole Miss and lost to Ezekiel Elliott and Ohio State in the playoff. He went undrafted in the 2015 NFL Draft and would get chances with the Packers and the Redskins before he would go on to play for Canada and in Australia. He'd later get signed to the Buccaneers practice squad and even played a part in the recent Disney movie called Safety. He waited his turn and it definitely paid off for him. Be sure to check out my full-length video about him in the comment section. At number 8, we have Mike Shula, the son of the NFL's all-time winningest coach, Don Shula. As we can all imagine, he was going to play football and probably be a quarterback, and that is exactly what would happen. He became an all-state player at Christopher Columbus High School and would later take his talents to Alabama. He started for 3 years for the Tide and had a ton of great victories before he was taken in the 12th round of the NFL Draft. Yes, I said that correctly. He only played 1 year before he went into coaching, where he got his first start in the NFL ranks and became the Dolphins quarterbacks coach in 2002. When Mike Price was fired by Alabama, Shula was named the head coach. He coached 4 years as the head man for the Tide and was eventually fired before he went back to the NFL, and he lost to Auburn every year. He deserves his own video someday, so I won't give every detail now, but he definitely had a crazy story after he was their quarterback. We all know Greg as the commentator for ESPN, but McElroy was a great quarterback for Alabama. He eventually went to Carroll Senior High School, where he was the backup to Missouri college football legend Chase Daniel. Greg was a star himself, and in terms of his career success, he is 5th in all-time passing yards and 2nd in touchdowns in Texas high school football history, and he committed to play football for Alabama. He didn't play much as a freshman or a sophomore, but he won the starting job as a junior, and he became a star. He led them to multiple big wins, a comeback against Auburn, a win over number 1 Florida in the SEC championship game, and eventually a win over Texas to win the national title in 2009. He started out 5-0 as a senior, but the rails went off after a loss to Florida, and the Tide ended up finishing at 10-3. He passed for a total of 5,691 yards and 39 touchdowns and was taken in the 7th round of the draft by the New York Jets. He played in a total of 2 games for the Jets and even started one, but he then retired and became a college football analyst for the SEC network, and his voice has now become iconic amongst college football fans. At number 6, we have Brodie Croyle, the son of former Alabama defensive end John Croyle. Like father, like son, Brodie played football and took a liking to the quarterback position. He became a high school football star in the state of Alabama and was the number 1 quarterback in his class. When he graduated, he held the Alabama state record for career passing yards and career touchdowns. He set marks for most passing yards in a season, passing yards in a game, touchdown passes in a season, and touchdown passes in a game. He stayed home to play for Alabama for college football and had a wild ride there. He played for 3 different coaches at one point, battled injuries, and didn't see the typical amount of success a Bama quarterback usually sees. He still put up pretty good numbers, and it was good enough for him to get drafted with the 8th overall pick in the 5th round by the Kansas City Chiefs. He had a chance to start in 2007, but he played very poor and would be an on and off guy throughout the year. He started in 2008, but got injured in his first game, and that signaled the end of his starting career, as he did go to the Cardinals, but by 2012 he was out of the league. He now works in troubled youth homes and does a lot of good for the community with his time, and he was definitely one of the more forgotten Alabama quarterbacks in my opinion, and too bad he could never win a game in the NFL. At number 5, we have the last quarterback from the 2000s era at Alabama in John Parker Wilson. Born and raised in Alabama, John became a star at Hoover High School, where he got offers from a ton of SEC schools, but he committed to the in-state Tide over their rival Tennessee. He was a backup his freshman year to Brody Croyle and passed for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. As a sophomore, he started every game and passed for 2,707 yards and 17 touchdowns, and also threw for over 200 yards in the first 7 games of the season, which was a new school record, and he ultimately finished with a school record 9 200-plus yard games in 1 year. As a junior, he broke the school record for touchdowns in a season with 18, had a game-winning play against Arkansas, and threw 3 touchdowns against Tennessee, but they lost to Auburn for the 6th straight year. He went 12-0 as a senior, defeated Auburn, and had a chance to go to the title game, but they lost to number 1 Florida in the SEC championship game, and then they lost their bowl game as well. He left Alabama with every major passing record at the time, but would go undrafted and never played a snap for the Falcons, Jaguars, or Steelers. He then went on to become a financial advisor and is now the color commentator for Alabama football. I want and definitely will do a video on him someday. At number 4, we have a more recent guy in Jalen Hurts. His father was a football coach in the state of Texas, so he was destined to become a college football quarterback. He loved the game and became a star at Channelview High School. As a senior, he passed for 2,384 yards with 26 touchdown passes, while also rushing for 1,300 yards on the ground and 25 scores on the ground as well. When it came to recruiting, he was a 4-star recruit and would later choose Alabama despite a late push from Texas A&M. He arrived at Alabama as the backup to blue-chip recruit Blake Barnett, but he beat him out by week 2, and Hurts produced a historic freshman season. He threw for 2,780 yards and 23 touchdowns, while only having 9 picks, but this guy was a dynamic weapon. He led them all the way to the college football playoff, where they would lose a heartbreaker to Clemson by way of Deshaun Watson to Hunter Renfrow, but he was still a young star. Hurts led the Tide back to the title as a sophomore, but he was benched at halftime for poor play, and Tua came in, and we all know what happened next. He completed a pass to Devontae Smith and won the title for them in overtime against Georgia. As a junior, Hurts lost the job to Tua, but when he went down in the SEC title game, Hurts came in to rescue and won the game. From there, Hurts would transfer to Oklahoma, where he had a star season and was a Heisman contender and was also drafted in the 2nd round by the Eagles. He got a chance to start a couple of games last year and would definitely look solid at times, and now with Wentz a Colt, it looks like Hurts will have a chance to be the starter in 2021, and I definitely need to do a video on the career of Hurts soon. At number 3, we have the most recent Alabama quarterback in Mac Jones. He's honestly my favorite player to ever come out of Alabama, but before that, he grew up in Florida and was a great young player who worked hard and was driven, but was not getting the kind of interest you would think. He would go to the SEC as he would commit to Kentucky, but then when Alabama came calling, he flipped to the Crimson Tide, as any quarterback would. He was behind Tua and Hurts at one point, and Bryce Young was committed to Alabama, so the odds of him playing were very low, but Matt worked, waited, and shined when his shot came. Tua would go down against Mississippi State with that severe hip injury, and with Hurts transferring to Oklahoma, Mac was the backup and got a chance to start for the rest of the year. He made some mistakes against Auburn, but had a good game in their win over Michigan, and he beat out Bryce Young for the job in 2021. He ended up throwing for 4,500 yards with 41 touchdowns and only 4 interceptions. He's personally my favorite quarterback from this past season, and I want nothing more than him to succeed in the NFL, and maybe he'll even go to the Patriots. I'm going to do a video on him for the NFL draft soon, so be sure to check that one out. At number 2, we have what many say is the best quarterback in Alabama history, and that is A.J. McCarron. A.J. played football from a young age, but his life almost ended before any of this could happen. He was involved in a severe jet ski accident, was left a huge scar on his head, and he almost didn't make it. Thankfully he did, and became a big-time high school football player in Mobile, Alabama, as at St. Paul's Episcopal High School, he went 14-1 and won a state title. He had offers from many SEC schools, but chose to stay home and play for Alabama. He redshirted his first year and then played as a backup as a redshirt freshman. As a sophomore, he led Alabama to the national title game after they lost to LSU in the game of the century during the year, but they would rematch against Les Miles and LSU in that game, and he got his first career ring as a starter. In 2012, he once again led them to an 11-1 regular season record, with their only loss coming to Johnny Manziel in Texas A&M. But they got to the title and beat Notre Dame, which was ring number 2 for him. As a senior, he led them to a third straight 11-1 regular season, but this time the loss came in Week 14 to Auburn by way of the kick 6, so he missed out on a chance to go to the SEC championship game and win the national title, and I bet that sucked as a senior. He finished with over 9,000 passing yards and 77 touchdowns while winning 2 rings as a starter for Alabama, and many consider him the best pure quarterback to ever play. He got drafted by the Bengals and would actually start a few games in 2015, including a playoff game. But things didn't work out for him as he was almost traded to the Browns, but the paperwork didn't go in time for the trade deadline, and since then he's played for the Bills, Raiders, and Texans, and his career is probably coming to an end pretty soon. He was definitely a great quarterback for the Tide and an all-time legend. Finally, at number 1, we have the one and only Tua Tagovailoa. In case you didn't know, he grew up in Hawaii, and his family worked him really hard to become a great football player. He was taught to be a lefty so he could be a better player, and his brother Talia was also a star. He went to St. Louis High School in Honolulu, the same one as Marcus Mariota, and blossomed into a 5-star prospect. He chose to commit to Alabama for the pro potential and the coaching, and his family even moved out there with him. As a freshman, he was a backup, but he came in and won the title game after Jalen Hurts was benched for poor performance, and Tua launched a pass to Devontae Smith to beat Georgia in overtime and win a title, and his name is in the Alabama history books for that. As a sophomore, he took over for Hurts and led them to an undefeated regular season, but he got injured against Georgia, and Jalen Hurts would come in and save the day and send them to the title game. Unfortunately, the title game didn't matter a whole lot for them as they got embarrassed by Trevor Lawrence and Clemson, but he would come back in 2019 on a mission. He was definitely overshadowed by Joe Burrow and was doing great until he had a severe hip injury against Mississippi State, but they did lose to LSU earlier in the year, and after a loss to Auburn later on, Alabama would miss the playoff. Tua declared for the 2020 NFL Draft and was taken by the Miami Dolphins. He started a few games and almost actually made the playoffs, but many wonder if he will actually be the future of the franchise, and there are a lot of questions about his future. And that is the top 10 quarterbacks in Alabama history. What do you guys think of this list? What do you think of each player? And let me know who you think the best Bama quarterback of all time is. I'd also love to know what school I should do next and any other topic or series I should try next on this channel. Before you go, if you enjoyed today's video or want to support what I'm doing here on YouTube, please be sure to give the video a like, subscribe if you love college football content, suggest another topic, and check out all my other videos on the end screen, including my video about what happened to the top 10 Clemson quarterbacks of all time. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.